She never meant for the Vampire King to read that letter. In furious ink by candlelight, she called him a blood-sucking tyrant and said she hoped he choked on his own arrogance and crumbled to dust in the sunlight. But instead of her friend, the message landed right in the Vampire King's hands. Now he is crossing the city at the witching hour, not to punish an enemy, but to meet the mortal woman who dared to curse him. The ink on Bridget's fingers was still damp when she realized her mistake. She stared at the cluttered desk where the letter had been, the empty space now mocking her, and her stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. Tyrant. Bloodsucking. Arrogant monster who cares more about silk cravats than starving children. Every word seemed to burn in her memory, accusing her of recklessness she couldn't afford. That letter was supposed to be private, meant for Marcus, her childhood friend who now worked as a courier in the Resistance network. Marcus would understand. He wouldn't judge, and he would keep it secret. But the letter was no longer there. Bridget searched the desk, scattering receipts and ledger pages, checked the floor, rifled through the basket where she kept her few precious possessions. Nothing. She was certain she had left the letter there, sealed with cheap wax, waiting for Marcus to collect it after his shift at the docks. And now it was gone. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to reconstruct the evening. Saraphene Valcourt appearing at the community center earlier that afternoon, impossibly elegant in dove-gray silk among the threadbare humans, flashing that perfect, poisonous smile and asking if she might borrow Bridget's table for a moment to review some taxation documents. Bridget had stepped away for perhaps 5 minutes to help Mrs. Chun with her ration card appeal. When she returned, Saraphene was already gone, a faint scent of night jasmine the only evidence she'd been there at all. The realization struck her like ice water. Saraphene had seen the letter. She had read the letter. And worse, she had taken the letter. Bridget pressed her hands flat against the desk, nails digging into the scarred wood. 10 years. 10 years since that vampire destroyed her scholarship to the Royal Academy. And still, it wasn't enough for her. She still wanted more. She still needed to humiliate her, to grind her into the dirt, and remind her of her place. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow streets of the Mortal District, and something deep in Bridget's chest tightened, her instincts screaming that something was wrong, that danger was circling closer with every passing second. She shut her eyes, trying to steady her heartbeat, trying to think of a way out, a place to hide anything. But then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy. Steady. Deliberate. Not the shuffle of a night worker returning home or the hurried pace of someone afraid of the curfew patrols. These were the footsteps of someone who had no need to hide. Someone who didn't fear being heard. Footsteps of absolute power. They stopped directly outside her door. Bridget froze, every muscle locked, barely breathing. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Then came the knock. Not loud, not threatening. 3 measured raps that somehow felt more terrifying than if the door had been kicked in. Another knock, perfectly spaced, patient. The candle flame guttered, shadows dancing across the walls, and Bridget's hand moved instinctively to the kitchen knife she kept by the sink. But even as her fingers closed around the worn handle, she knew how useless it would be. The door didn't burst open. It simply opened, the cheap lock offering no resistance at all, as if the wood itself had surrendered to an authority it couldn't deny. Cold air rushed inside, extinguishing half the candles in the room, and a shadow filled the doorway. Tall, impossibly tall, wrapped in a black coat that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Bridget instinctively stepped back, her spine hitting the wall, the knife trembling in her grip. But then the pale light of the full moon slipped through the open door, illuminating the intruder's face, and her entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. Platinum blonde hair, falling like silk past broad shoulders. Features carved from marble, too perfect to be human, too cold to be kind. Eyes that gleamed silver in the darkness, ancient and knowing. It was him, Zarek Darkwell, the Vampire King. And he was holding her letter. Zarek stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a coffin lid sealing shut. He unfolded the letter with deliberate slowness, and when he spoke, his voice was like winter itself, beautiful, deadly, inevitable. Blood-sucking tyrant who cares more about silk cravats than starving humans. He paused, silver eyes lifting to meet hers. Eloquent. Tell me, was this meant as poetry or prophecy? Bridget's grip tightened on the knife, though they both knew it was useless. She was going to die anyway. Saraphene had made certain of that. So, what did she have left to lose? 10 years of swallowed rage, 10 years of watching children faint in breadlines while vampire nobility glittered in their palace, 10 years of biting her tongue until it bled. All of it came roaring up her throat like wildfire. It was meant as truth. The words came out stronger than she'd expected. When was the last time you walked through the mortal districts, Your Majesty? When did you last see Mrs. Chen's daughter collapse from hunger? Or the Tran family disappeared after they couldn't pay the blood tithe? Or the water system that's been broken for 6 months while your court hosts masquerade balls? She was shaking now, but not from fear. From fury. You've ruled for 3 centuries, and half your kingdom is dying while you sit on a throne and pretend we don't exist. So, yes, I called you a tyrant. What else should I call someone who takes our blood but gives us nothing in return? The silence stretched like a blade between them. Zarek's expression was unreadable, ancient as stone. Then, impossibly, he moved to her threadbare armchair and sat, the expensive fabric of his coat stark against the faded upholstery. Continue, he said quietly. And God help her, she did. For an hour, Bridget spoke. She told him about the tripled blood tithes that no one dared question, about the crumbling schools where human children learn nothing but subservience, about the permits required for everything, to work, to marry, to move between districts, while vampires glided through the city as if it belonged to them alone. She told him about the families who went into the palace for service and never came back, about the medicine shortages, the broken streetlights in mortal neighborhoods where attacks happened in the dark, the cold, bureaucratic cruelty of immortals who saw human lives as mayfly brief and therefore meaningless. She expected him to interrupt, to strike her, to end it. But Zarek sat motionless in her threadbare chair, silver eyes fixed on her face, listening with an intensity that felt more dangerous than rage. When she finally ran out of words, her voice hoarse and her hands still trembling, the silence felt heavier than before. The candle had burned down to a stub. Dawn couldn't be far away. Zarek rose in one fluid movement, and Bridget's breath caught. This was it. This was where she paid for her audacity. But he simply looked at her, something unreadable moving behind those ancient eyes. No one has spoken to me like this in 300 years. His voice was softer now, almost wondering. I will consider your words. He moved toward the door, then paused on the threshold, his profile sharp against the darkness outside. Expect me again, Bridget Roberts. And then he was gone, vanishing into the night like smoke, leaving only the scent of cold air and old stone behind. Bridget stood frozen in her tiny apartment, shaking and impossibly, inexplicably alive. 5 days passed like a held breath. Bridget went through the motions of her life, recording accounts at the community center, distributing ration cards, avoiding the questions in Maya's worried eyes, but part of her remained suspended in that moment when the Vampire King had looked at her and said he would consider her words. She'd expected nothing. She'd expected to be forgotten the moment he left, her accusations dismissed as the ravings of an insignificant mortal. Then the trucks arrived. They came at dawn, Massive vehicles bearing the royal crest, and they brought food. Real food, not the stale grain and questionable preserved meat the mortal districts usually received. Fresh bread, vegetables, protein rations that didn't taste like sawdust. Medical supplies followed, antibiotics, bandages, medicines that had been unavailable for months. By the third day, repair crews were working on the water system, their vampire overseers actually speaking to human workers with something resembling respect. Mrs. Chun wept when her daughter ate her first full meal in weeks. The Tran family's neighbors whispered prayers of gratitude. And Bridget stood in the middle of it all, watching everything she'd screamed into the darkness manifest into reality, and felt something crack open in her chest. He'd listened. The Vampire King had actually listened. The messenger arrived on the fifth evening, all dark elegance and formal courtesies, bearing a scroll sealed with black wax and the Darkwell crest. Bridget's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Not a death warrant. An invitation. The Vampire King requests the presence of Bridget Roberts at the Obsidian Palace to provide counsel on matters concerning the mortal districts. A carriage will arrive at sunset. She should refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to stay away from that place, from the glittering nightmare that had once consumed her dreams and spat them back broken. But if Zarek was genuinely willing to listen, to change things, could she really hide in her apartment and let the opportunity slip away? Maya helped her dress in the only decent clothes she owned, a simple dark dress that had seen better years. When the carriage arrived, sleek and black as a raven's wing, Bridget climbed inside with her heart hammering against her ribs. The journey through the city felt like traveling backward through time. She'd made this trip once before, 15 years old and bright-eyed, clutching her acceptance letter to the Royal Academy. Back when she and Zarek had been friends, before his father's death forced him onto the throne, before immortal politics and ancient traditions had torn their childhood bond apart. She remembered training sessions in the palace gardens, Zarek teaching her to fight with wooden swords, laughing when she managed to disarm him. She remembered the way he'd looked at her scholarship letter, genuine pride in his eyes, promising that nothing would change between them. Then Saraphene had arrived, elegant and poisonous, whispering into the ears of the Academy Council. Bridget's scholarship had been revoked without explanation. Her applications to every other institution had been mysteriously rejected. And Zarek, newly crowned and drowning in the weight of his father's legacy, had said nothing. The carriage pulled through the palace gates, and Bridget forced herself to breathe. She was walking back into the place that had destroyed her, but this time, she wouldn't be the naive girl with dreams too big for her mortal station. This time, she had nothing left to lose. The Obsidian Palace rose before her like a nightmare carved from black glass and ancient stone, its towers piercing the twilight sky. Bridget stepped from the carriage, her legs unsteady, and tried not to remember the last time she'd climbed these steps with hope in her heart. She made it exactly 3 steps into the grand entrance hall before Saraphene materialized from the shadows. Bridget Roberts. The vampire's voice was honey laced with arsenic, her ivory gown flowing around her like liquid moonlight. How unexpected to see you here. Alive, I mean. Bridget's spine stiffened. Saraphene. You must be wondering how your little letter found its way to His Majesty. Saraphene circled her slowly, a predator savoring the moment before the kill. I delivered it personally. Every venomous word. I even added a note suggesting you were organizing rebellion in the mortal districts. Her smile was radiant, terrible. I expected him to have you executed within the hour. Imagine my surprise when he simply left. And now here you are, walking into the palace as if you belong here. The rage that had been simmering in Bridget's chest for 10 years threatened to boil over. You've been trying to destroy me since I was 15 years old. When does it end? When you finally understand your place, little mortal. when you stop reaching for things that were never meant for. Saraphene. The single word cracked through the hall like a whip. Every vampire in the vicinity froze, and Saraphene's beautiful face went carefully blank. Zarek descended the grand staircase with terrifying grace, his presence filling the space until the air itself felt heavier. His silver eyes were cold as winter stars, fixed on Saraphene with an expression that made even Bridget's breath catch. "Miss Roberts is my protected guest," he said, his voice soft and absolutely lethal. "Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any harm that befalls her will be answered with my personal wrath. Do I make myself clear?" Saraphene's jaw tightened, but she inclined her head. "Perfectly, Your Majesty. Leave us." The vampire glided away, fury radiating from every elegant line of her body, and Bridget found herself alone with the vampire king once more. Zarek's expression softened marginally as he gestured toward a corridor. "Walk with me." His private study was surprisingly warm, all dark wood and leather-bound books, a fire burning in the hearth despite vampires having no need for heat. Zarek poured 2 glasses of deep red wine, not blood, she realized with relief, just wine, and handed her one. "Your assessment was accurate," he said without preamble. "I have ruled from a place of detached immortality for too long. I forgot that short lives still matter. That pain doesn't hurt less because it's temporary." He met her eyes. "I need someone who will continue to tell me these truths. Someone the mortals actually trust." Bridget's heart began to pound. "What are you asking?" "I'm offering you a position. Human liaison to the vampire court. A seat on my council. Real power to change the things you spoke of." He paused. "It won't be easy. Half my court will despise you for it. But if you're willing..." "Yes." The word escaped before she could stop it. "Yes, I'll do it." For the first time since she'd met him, Zarek smiled. The council chamber was a cathedral of shadows and power, lit by chandeliers that cast more darkness than light. Bridget sat at the obsidian table surrounded by creatures who had walked the earth for centuries, their eyes tracking her every breath like wolves watching a lamb that had wandered into their den. Lord Casimir, ancient as stone and twice as cold, spoke first. "Your Majesty, surely this is a jest. A mortal? At the Council of Eternal Night?" His laugh was dry as desert wind. What insight could prey possibly offer predators? "Perhaps insight into why your districts are on the verge of revolt," Bridget said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Or would you prefer to wait until the mortals start burning vampire holdings?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Lady Morgana leaned forward, her crimson lips curving into something that might have been a smile on a less ancient face. "The little human has teeth. How quaint. Miss Roberts is here because she possesses something many of you have lost over your long existence." Zarek's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Honesty. She will tell us truths we may not wish to hear, but truths we need to hear nonetheless. Anyone who questions her competence questions my judgment. Is that understood?" The vampires exchanged glances, but fell silent. For the next 2 hours, Bridget endured their barely concealed hostility as they discussed blood tithe quotas, territorial disputes, and enforcement policies. She took notes, asked pointed questions that made several council members shift uncomfortably, and tried to ignore the way some of them looked at her throat. Then Lord Casimir presented the quarterly tithe reports, and something caught her eye. The numbers didn't match. She'd seen the actual collection records in the mortal districts. She'd helped families file their receipts. The discrepancy was significant. "Excuse me," she interrupted, and felt every immortal gaze snap to her. "These figures show collections of 1,500 units per district per month. But the official mortal records show 4,500 units collected. Where's the difference going?" The silence was deafening. Lord Casimir's face remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes. The mortal records must be in error. Humans often miscalculate. I have the receipts, Bridget said quietly. Signed by your own collectors. 3 times the agreed amount for the last 8 months. That's not miscalculation. That's theft. Zarek's expression went very still. Casimir, explain. What followed was a rapid unraveling. Accusations, counter-accusations, the exposure of a corruption network that had been bleeding the mortal districts dry while reporting false numbers to the crown. By the time the council adjourned, 3 vampire lords had been stripped of their positions, and Bridget had earned both grudging respect and several new enemies. She didn't realize how exhausted she was until she returned to the studies Zarek had given her to work in. The books and ledgers she'd requested were stacked on the desk, and she lost herself in analyzing district reports, looking for other discrepancies. She didn't hear him enter. Didn't notice the hour had grown late until Zarek's voice, soft and closer than expected, said, "You should rest." Bridget looked up to find him standing beside her desk, still in his formal council attire, silver eyes reflecting the lamplight.
Fine.
There's so much to review, and if there are other corruption schemes. They've existed for decades. They can wait until tomorrow. He reached out, gently closing the ledger in front of her. His hand lingered near hers, not quite touching, and the air between them suddenly felt charged with something that had nothing to do with politics. "You were extraordinary today," he said quietly. "Fearless." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I know. That's what made it extraordinary." His gaze held hers, and Bridget felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The space between them seemed to shrink, and she found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The line of his jaw, the way his lips curved when he almost smiled, the dangerous pull of those silver eyes. "Your Majesty." Saraphene's voice sliced through the moment like ice. She stood in the doorway, her expression perfectly composed except for the fury burning in her eyes. "How cozy." Zarek stepped back smoothly, but the spell was broken. "Saraphene, I don't recall inviting you. My apologies. I came to deliver these reports you requested." She glided forward, placed papers on the desk, and smiled at Bridget with poisonous sweetness. "Do try not to work our human liaison to death, Your Majesty. Mortals are so very fragile." Then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of night jasmine and the unmistakable promise of war. The summons came at midnight, delivered not by a messenger, but by Zarek himself, appearing at her door like a shadow made solid. "Walk with me," he said, and Bridget found herself following him through corridors she'd never seen, deeper into the heart of the palace. His private chambers were nothing like she'd expected. No throne, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Just a room filled with books, maps, and a window that overlooked the city, both mortal and vampire districts visible in the sprawling lights below. It was the room of someone who actually cared about what he ruled. "I wanted to apologize," Zarek said, standing at the window with his back to her. "For 10 years ago, for what Saraphene did to you, and for my silence." Bridget's breath caught. "You knew?" "Not at first. By the time I discovered what she'd done, you were already gone. Your scholarship revoked, your applications rejected, your future destroyed." He turned to face her, and the pain in his expression looked almost human. "I was newly crowned, drowning in my father's expectations and the weight of traditions centuries old. The council demanded I distance myself from mortal attachments. They said it made me look weak." "So you did." The words came out harder than she intended. "So I did," he agreed quietly. "And I've regretted it every day since. You were my friend, Bridget. My only real friend. You didn't see the crown or the fangs, you saw me. And I abandoned you when you needed me most." She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to that hurt like a shield. But the rawness in his voice stripped away her defenses. "Why are you telling me this now?" He moved closer, and the moonlight caught the silver in his eyes. "Because for 3 centuries, I've felt nothing. Just emptiness. I went through the motions of ruling, of existing, but I was hollow inside. I didn't care about the kingdom or myself. I was just waiting for time to pass, as it always does for immortals." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his ancient face. "Then your letter arrived, full of rage and truth and fire, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I felt something. You made me angry. You made me ashamed. You made me want to be better." Bridget's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Zarek, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it." He reached for her hand, his fingers cool against her skin. "But I needed you to know that you've already changed everything. That you matter. That you've always mattered." The touch sent lightning through her veins, terrifying and intoxicating all at once. For a moment, she let herself imagine it, standing beside him, not as liaison or advisor, but as something more. Then reality crashed back in like cold water. She pulled her hand away, taking a step back. "We can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm mortal." The words tumbled out, raw and desperate. "Because I'll age and die while you stay exactly as you are. Because in 100 years, I'll be dust and you'll barely remember my name. Because I refuse to be a footnote in your eternal existence, a brief distraction you once found amusing." "You think that's what you are to me?" His voice was rough. "A distraction? I don't know what I am to you." Bridget's voice cracked. "I don't know what any of this is. 3 weeks ago, you were the tyrant I hated. Now you're—" She stopped, unable to finish. "Now I'm what?" She met his eyes, and the yearning she saw there made her chest ache. "Now you're someone I could destroy myself loving." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things neither of them could say. Finally, Zarek stepped back, giving her space even though it clearly cost him. "Then I'll wait," he said softly. "However long it takes. Until you're ready. Until you believe." He left her standing in his chambers, surrounded by maps of a kingdom they both wanted to save, her hand still tingling from his touch, and her heart breaking from possibilities too dangerous to reach for. The training grounds were empty when Saraphene found her. Bridget was practicing defensive stances that Zarek's weapons master had taught her, trying to exhaust the restless energy that had haunted her since that night in his chambers. She didn't hear the vampire approach until that honeyed voice cut through the silence. "How diligent. Learning to fight as if it will make a difference." Saraphene leaned against a stone pillar, immaculate as always in sapphire silk. "Tell me, do you truly believe you have a future here?" Bridget lowered her practice blade. "What do you want, Saraphene?" "To offer you a kindness. A truth." The vampire circled closer. "The Crimson Court Ball is in 3 weeks. Ancient tradition demands the king choose his queen before the blood moon. Every eligible vampire noble in the kingdom will be presented. Immortal, powerful, politically advantageous." Her smile was a knife. "And then there's you. Mortal, fragile. A flicker of candlelight compared to our eternal flame. What exactly do you think you can offer him?" The words hit every fear Bridget had been nursing in the dark. "I'm not trying to. Please. I've seen the way he looks at you. The way you look at him." Saraphene's expression turned almost pitying. "But love doesn't change biology, dear. In 40 years, you'll be old and gray while he remains unchanged. In 60, you'll be dead. He'll mourn for perhaps a decade, a mere heartbeat for an immortal, and then he'll move on. You'll be forgotten. A brief, mortal mistake." Bridget's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet Saraphene's gaze. "Are you finished?" "For now." The vampire turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and do try not to embarrass yourself at the ball. It's black tie. Though I suppose you could always wear that charming red hoodie. Bridget found Zarek in the palace gardens, standing beneath an ancient oak in a pool of moonlight. He turned as she approached, and something in his expression told her he'd been expecting her. Saraphene found you, he said. Not a question. She's not wrong. Bridget stopped a few feet away, wrapping her arms around herself. The ball, the traditions, the political reality. None of it matters. It all matters. The words burst out of her. You're the vampire king. You need a queen who can stand beside you for centuries, not decades. Someone whose mortality won't make you weak in the eyes of your court. Zarek closed the distance between them in 2 strides. You want to know what makes me weak? 300 years of feeling nothing. Of going through endless nights with no purpose, no passion, no reason to care whether the sun rose or not. That's weakness, Bridget. You make me strong. You make me want to be worthy of this crown. For how long? Her voice cracked. Until I'm gone, and you have an eternity left to regret. Then let me have regret. His hands found her shoulders, urgent, desperate. Let me have 40 years of truly living rather than 300 more of being dead inside. Don't you understand? You're the only one who sees me. Not the crown, not the fangs, not the monster, just me. You challenged me to be better. You made me remember why I wanted to rule in the first place. Tears burned in Bridget's eyes. I can't be your queen. I'm just human. You're extraordinary. He moved closer, and she could feel the chill of his presence, the dangerous pull of centuries of loneliness seeking anchor. And I love you. The words hung between them like a spell. When he leaned in, she raised a hand to his chest, stopping him even though it felt like tearing herself in half. I can't. Not like this. Not while I'm still just a temporary. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, then deepened into something that felt like 3 centuries of isolation finding warmth. His hand cupped the back of her neck, careful despite the strength in his ancient bones, and Bridget felt herself melt into him, her fears dissolving under the desperate tenderness of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. His cool fingers framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Then prove it, he whispered fiercely. Prove to me, to the kingdom, and to yourself that mortality is not weakness. Show them all who you truly are. Show them that a human heart beats stronger than any undead thing in this palace. He stepped back, leaving her trembling in the moonlight, and Bridget realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that she wanted to. That she would. The emergency bells shattered the night like breaking glass. Bridget was halfway across the palace grounds when a guard found her, his face pale with panic. The Crimson Brotherhood. They've taken hostages from the mortal districts. 20 humans, including Maya. Her sister's name left her lips as a prayer and a curse. Where? The old fortress at Blackthorn Ridge. His Majesty is assembling. She was running before he finished. The war room was chaos. Zarek stood over a map, issuing orders to his elite guard with cold precision. He looked up as Bridget burst in, and his expression went hard. No. She's my sister. Which is exactly why you're not coming. His voice was iron. The Brotherhood are extremists. They want blood and war. I won't risk you. You don't get to decide that. Bridget planted her hands on the table. I know those catacombs. I used to explore them as a child. I can get in while you're breaching the front. Absolutely not. Their eyes locked across the map, wills clashing, until Zarek turned to his captain. Move out. I want her under guard until we return. But Bridget had learned from the best. She waited exactly 10 minutes before slipping through the palace's forgotten passages, grabbing silver blades from the armory and disappearing into the night. The catacombs were exactly as she remembered, dark, twisting, smelling of earth and old stone. She moved through them with the confidence of childhood memory, her heart hammering as she heard muffled voices above. The Brotherhood's fortress had been built over these ancient tunnels, and they'd forgotten to guard what they didn't know existed. She emerged in what must have been old wine storage, now repurposed as a prison. Maya huddled with the other captives, her eyes widening in shock as Bridget pressed a finger to her lips and began cutting through ropes with swift, silent efficiency. "Go," she mouthed, pointing toward the tunnel entrance. "Run." She'd freed half the prisoners when the door burst open. The Brotherhood vampire was massive, his eyes gleaming red with fanaticism. "The human pet thinks herself a hero." Bridget didn't hesitate. She threw the silver blade with every ounce of strength she possessed. It struck him in the shoulder, and his howl of pain brought 3 more rushing in. She fought like Zarek had taught her. Fast, dirty, using their arrogance against them. Silver burned vampire flesh where it touched. Her smaller size made her harder to catch. But she was still human, still mortal, and when the Brotherhood leader grabbed Maya as a shield, Bridget didn't think. She launched herself between them, taking the blow meant for her sister. Pain exploded across her ribs as she hit the wall, but Maya was running, the other prisoners escaping into the tunnels, and that was all that mattered. The leader raised his hand for a killing strike. Then the world turned to ice and fury. Zarek appeared in the doorway like an avenging storm, and Bridget had never seen him like this. Eyes blazing silver fire, moving with speed that made him seem to teleport, power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself feel heavy. The Brotherhood vampires tried to fight. They might as well have fought a hurricane. He tore through them with terrifying efficiency, no wasted movement, no mercy. 3 centuries of deadly grace unleashed. When the leader tried to run, Zarek caught him by the throat, slamming him against the wall with force that cracked stone. "You took what was mine." Zarek's voice was death itself. "You hurt her." The vampire's response was a gasping laugh. "Check his coat pocket. See who really orchestrated this." Zarek's eyes narrowed, but he reached into the vampire's coat and pulled out a folded letter. His expression went very still as he read it. Then he looked at Bridget, who was struggling to her feet despite the pain in her ribs. "Saraphene," she said, recognizing the elegant handwriting even from across the room. It was Saraphene all along. The letter contained everything: coordination with the Brotherhood, promises of political power, explicit instructions to kidnap Maya and eliminate the human liaison in the rescue. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Zarek's guards secured the surviving Brotherhood members while he crossed to Bridget in 2 swift strides, his hands gentle as they checked her injuries, his earlier fury giving way to something that looked almost like fear. "You could have died," he said, voice rough. "But I didn't." She managed to smile despite the pain. "And now we have what we need to stop her." Above them, the sound of the prisoners reaching safety echoed through the catacombs. Maya's voice called her name, alive and free. Bridget had never felt more mortal, more fragile, more breakable, and she'd never felt stronger. The council chamber had never been so full. Word of the rescue had spread through both mortal and vampire districts like wildfire. The human liaison who defied the king himself to save her people, who'd walked into a Brotherhood stronghold and walked out victorious. Now Bridget stood before the Council of Eternal Night not as a trembling outsider, but as someone who'd earned her place through blood and courage. "I demand formal charges be brought against Saraphene Valcourt," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber, "for conspiracy, manipulation, and orchestrating an act of terror against human citizens." Saraphene sat in her council seat, perfectly composed, but Bridget saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Baseless accusations from a mortal desperate for. I have evidence. Bridget spread the documents across the obsidian table. Letters in your handwriting coordinating with Brotherhood leaders. Bank records showing payments from your accounts to known extremists. And this. She held up a decade-old file. Your correspondence with the Royal Academy Council, falsifying reports about my character to ensure my scholarship was revoked. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Lord Casimir leaned forward, studying the documents with ancient eyes. These appear authentic. They're forgeries, Saraphene insisted, but her voice had lost its honeyed confidence. Then explain this. One of Zarek's guard captains stepped forward. I served in your household for 50 years, Lady Valcourt. I carried some of these messages myself. I stayed silent out of loyalty, but I will not be complicit in terrorism. Another vampire rose. Then another. Witnesses who'd watched Saraphene manipulate policy, sabotage reforms, and whisper poison in royal ears for decades. The dam had broken. Saraphene's composure shattered. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back, her beautiful face twisted with fury. You want the truth? Fine. I did it. All of it. Because she doesn't belong here. She jabbed a finger at Bridget. A mortal, influencing the vampire king, making him weak with her pathetic human concerns. I've spent 2 centuries building this court's power, and she waltzed in with her righteous indignation and turned him into something soft. Something foolish. You orchestrated kidnapping and murder. Zarek's voice was colder than winter, because you couldn't accept change. I orchestrated preservation of our way of life. Saraphene's eyes blazed. Vampires are superior. We should rule absolutely, not cater to cattle. Everything I did was to remind you of that truth, to eliminate the distraction poisoning your judgment. She turned her fury on Bridget. You made him care about them. You made him choose mortality over eternity. I couldn't let you destroy everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Saraphene Valcourt. Zarek stood, and every vampire in the chamber felt the weight of his ancient authority. By unanimous decision of this council, you are stripped of title, lands, and position. You are exiled beyond the kingdom's borders. You have 72 hours to leave. If you return, the sentence is final death. Saraphene's face went pale, true fear flickering across her features for the first time in centuries. 2 guards escorted her from the chamber, and Bridget watched her go, feeling not triumph, but a strange, hollow relief. That evening, Bridget stood before the same council and proposed the Foundation for Human Advancement, real funding for education, healthcare, infrastructure. To her surprise, they voted in favor. Even the vampire lords who'd once viewed her as prey now looked at her with grudging respect. Later, alone in the palace gardens, Bridget stared up at the stars and realized something had shifted inside her. She'd proven herself not just to the kingdom, but to herself. She wasn't just human. She was Bridget Roberts, and she'd changed the world. Ready to accept it yet? Zarek's voice came from behind her. She turned, meeting his silver eyes, and smiled. Almost. The crimson gown arrived at sunset, wrapped in black silk and accompanied by a note in Zarek's precise handwriting. Wear this tonight. Be brave one more time. Bridget traced her fingers over the fabric, deep red like arterial blood, but soft as shadow, with intricate silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. Maya helped her dress, hands trembling with excitement as she fastened the delicate closures. When Bridget finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged in that world of immortal elegance. She looked like a queen. The Crimson Court Ball was already in full swing when she arrived, The grand ballroom packed with centuries of vampire nobility beneath a ceiling of enchanted glass that revealed the blood-red moon hanging huge and terrible in the sky. Whispers rippled through the crowd as she entered with the human delegation. Every vampire noble present had dressed to impress, their immortal beauty on full display, each one angling to catch the king's eye. Zarek sat on his throne at the far end of the hall, devastating in black and silver, his platinum hair gleaming under the moonlight. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Bridget's heart stuttered. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, his voice booming through the chamber. By ancient tradition, the vampire king must choose his queen before the blood moon sets. Let the presentation begin. One by one, vampire nobles approached the throne, beautiful, powerful, eternal. Each curtsied with perfect grace, offering political alliances, ancient bloodlines, centuries of experience. The crowd murmured approval at each candidate, debating their merits in hushed, eager tones. Bridget stood with the human delegation, watching, her chest tight with something that felt like grief. This was always how it would end, how it had to end. She'd changed the kingdom, saved her people, proven her worth. That would have to be enough. Then Zarek stood. The chamber fell silent as he descended from his throne, his movement liquid grace, his silver eyes fixed on a single point in the crowd. He walked past the vampire nobles, past their shocked expressions, past centuries of tradition and expectation. He walked directly to Bridget. The crowd gasped. Bridget couldn't breathe as he stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the chill of his presence, see the vulnerability flickering behind his ancient eyes. "This mortal woman," Zarek said, his voice carrying through the absolute silence, "called me a tyrant and made me want to be worthy of my crown. She fought beside me, bled for this kingdom, and sees me as I truly am." His hand found hers, cool fingers intertwining with warm. "I choose her, mortal, temporary, and more alive than any of us. Let this mark a new era." The silence shattered into chaos, shock, outrage, disbelief. But Zarek never looked away from her face. "I offer you a choice," he said quietly, "just for her. Remain mortal as my queen, or accept the turning and become immortal. Either way, you're mine if you'll have me." Bridget's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "I choose to remain human," she said, her voice steady and clear. "A mortal queen will prove our quality. I'll be the bridge between our worlds, not by becoming like you, but by staying exactly who I am." Something fierce and proud blazed in Zarek's expression. "Then let it be done." He led her to the center of the ballroom as the ancient blood moon ceremony began. The vampire elders chanted words in a language older than memory, and Zarek drew a silver blade across his palm. His blood welled dark and impossibly red in the moonlight. "This bond will not turn you," he murmured, pressing his bleeding palm to hers. "But it will tie our lives together. Extend your years without stealing your humanity. You'll age, but slowly. You'll remain yourself, but you'll be mine as I am yours." The moment their blood mingled, power surged through Bridget like lightning, like coming home, like finding something she'd been missing her entire life. She gasped, and Zarek caught her, held her steady as the bond seared through them both, undeniable and eternal. The crowd felt it too, the snap of connection, the weight of destiny settling into place. When it was done, Zarek cupped her face with blood-stained hands and kissed her in front of the entire court. It tasted like copper and moonlight and forever. "My queen," he whispered against her lips. "My crimson dawn." The months that followed transformed the kingdom. Queen Bridget established the Crimson Dawn Accords, true legal equality, human representation in government, the end of blood tithes replaced by voluntary donation. She was beloved by both species, fierce and compassionate in equal measure, proving that a mortal heart could change an immortal world. She even sent word to Saraphene, offering a path to redemption and a place in the new order. The response came written in bitter ink: "I'd rather rot in exile than bow to livestock." Bridget filed the letter away without regret. Now she stood on the palace balcony at dawn, watching the sky bleed from black to gold. Zarek's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, and she leaned back into his cool embrace. "Tell me what you see," he murmured, as he did every morning, unable to witness the sunrise that would destroy him. "Fire," Bridget whispered, watching the sun break over the horizon. "Gold and orange and pink, like the world is being born again. It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you." She turned in his arms, meeting those silver eyes that had once terrified her, that now felt like home. "I love you." "I know," he said, smiling. "You've told me every morning for 3 months. And I'll tell you every morning for the rest of my life." "However long that may be," Zarek agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I'll treasure every single dawn." They stood together as the sun rose higher, mortal and immortal, temporary and eternal, exactly where they were meant to be. Bridget had once believed she was too human, too insignificant, too brief to matter. Now she knew better. Love didn't transcend the boundary between mortality and eternity. It made the boundary irrelevant. If her journey from that furious letter at 2 a.m. to becoming the Crimson Dawn Queen moved you, then this story was meant for you. Hit that like button if you believe love can bridge any divide. Drop a comment with the moment that made your heart race and subscribe, because tomorrow another story is already waiting in the shadows. Another world where the impossible becomes inevitable. Another journey where courage transforms everything.